and welcome to this week's Hippie Hyena. Now, as most of my audience is American, I can assume you probably have at least a passing or cursory knowledge of Turning Points USA, which is a kind of right-wing / fascist Christian right evangelical kind of news outfit media thing run by Charlie Kirk. Well, they've got some British offices now, apparently, and they're trying to pull the same scam over here as they did over there. So let's see what we can learn from looking at the British one, and hopefully my American viewers, you might still enjoy this, because I think pretty much everything that I say probably applies quite a lot in America as well. Maybe. Let's find out as we have a look at Turning Points UK.
As well as Pride Month, which runs throughout the whole of June, this month marks LGBT plus History Month, an entire month dedicated to teaching our young people about the history of the LGBT plus community.
When you say an entire month, it kind of implies that that's all that kids are doing. But obviously, that's not all that they're doing. They're doing other things as well. It's just nonsense. As if, like, because it's LGBTQ History Month, every person in the UK must sit down all day, every day, and do nothing but concentrate on and learn about the history of LGBTQ people in British history. But what a load of nonsense. And can I just say, this is shockingly low production value for a ostensibly professional outfit. I mean, I assume these people aren't volunteers and that they're being paid. I mean, it's not even a high quality webcam. I mean, you can get one much better than this for like a £5 on eBay. For God's sake, Turning Point UK, step it up a bit, because this looks shoddy as the pixels. I mean, this video is so small. Usually I've got to scale things down to fit them in my little cinema window. But this one I actually had to scale up. And the sound quality is so bad. Like, it's so quiet. Use some goddamn compression, some normalization, something, please.
We as Brits have a rich history, a history to be proud of. And we ought to be teaching our young people about that history.
And obviously we are. I mean, whether or not we should be proud of our history, which always seems to me like to be a really odd concept, but we'll probably talk about like that more later on another one of their videos. But, what do you think we're doing the rest of the time? The whole point of like a history month directed towards a particular thing like Black History Month and this LGBTQ plus History Month, and there's probably more, there's probably like a women's one, is because largely we don't teach about those things the rest of the time, as in every other month that isn't one of these months is like standard history month. It's just whatever is being taught in history classes, and that's even if like the teachers want to bother sort of doing something about their changing the curriculum or whatever to do something towards these like history months or Women's Day or whatever. Usually history teachers just follow the curriculum and ignore this kind of stuff, I mean, there's nothing like mandated. The way you get to have one of these months is you just like apply to it from the government or something, and if they think it sounds like a sort of good PR move, they say yes to it, and it basically doesn't mean anything. So like it kind of seems like they just more have a problem with like LGBTQ people being mentioned at all in any context, which funnily enough is exactly why we need things like LGBTQ plus History Month.
About the key events and people who have helped to influence our nation and shape it into what it is today. We ought to be teaching British history, European history, and world history. But what we shouldn't be doing is teaching history based on identity politics. We shouldn't be dividing history based on, for example, sexual orientation.
She's doing what I like to call the All Lives Matter gambit. This is basically when you do what the All Lives Matter people did, where they complain about, people trying to stick up for black lives by saying, but what about all lives? What about other lives? Well, what about them? I mean, nobody's sort of threatening those lives at the moment, not particularly. Like, it's irrelevant. It's effectively a non sequitur. And they say it like this because it sort of sounds better than saying, well, I'd really rather we just sort of swept LGBTQ people under the rug, really. And that's what they mean. The only reason they don't want a LGBTQ History Month is for the precise reason that other people do, is because if you don't have one, it makes it easier, even in a small, tiny way, to erase LGBTQ plus people from history. And that's really what this is all about. But if they just said that, hey, we at Turning Points UK, we just want to erase non-cisgendered people from history. That sort of sounds bad, so they have to come up with a way to spin it, and this is the method that they've landed upon. But it is just that. It's just spin. It's just PR on what is an extremely abhorrent opinion.
We shouldn't be teaching gay history versus straight history. We should be remembering historical figures on the basis of their contributions, what they did, not their sexual identity.
Well, they aren't, but here's the thing. People with, let's say, a minority sexual identity, as much as you can call LGBTQ plus people a minority, I suppose they are. I haven't looked at the statistics on that. But the thing is, they've had a very specific and relatively interesting, I'd have thought, history, you know. I mean, look at Alan Turing, who some people put down to winning the Second World War for us. And he had an extremely difficult life, was persecuted for being gay, when he was a national hero, should have been recognised as such. You know, that's a very specific set of experiences that people like Alan Turing went through during that time. And so, if you're studying all kinds of things in our history, why not study that? I really can't think of a good reason why not. It sounds like a really interesting part of our history. And you'd learn a sort of wider context for the history in terms of like the society as a whole sort of changing attitudes towards difference, I suppose you might say. Like, studying LGBTQ plus history is completely legitimate, and really I feel like every historian should maybe know a bit about it, maybe. I mean, obviously they might have like their specific interest, but if you're sort of offering a kind of general historical account of Great Britain, that's going to be part of it. And why not dedicate a month to it out of the rest of your child's education in history on every subject, you know? But you'll notice really all these guys want to harp on about is the Second World War all the bloody time, which is weird considering they probably would have been on the other side of that at the time.
Once again, we are seeing this divisive, toxic ideology of identity politics being peddled in our schools.
To be fair, the only toxic identity politicking I'm watching coming out of wherever is coming out right now from your YouTube channel, love.
And it is poisoning our education system.
A monumentally stupid take there. And this channel is absolutely chock full of them. Just absolutely chock full. Every video is this little bite-sized idiocy for our delicious enjoyment. It's almost like a box of chocolates where every chocolate is filled with something hateful or stupid. So let's dive into another one, shall we?
Hey up, my name's Lee Anderson. I'm the Member of Parliament for Ashfield and Eastwood. And I love the fact that I'm English.
Why? I mean, genuinely, why? It's just a thing that maybe there's just a part of my soul missing or something. I just don't really understand this. Like, I mean, you know, I don't hate being British. I'm happy to be British. That's it. It's fine. You know, there are certain things I like about being British, such as, you know, I like the fact that we've got a National Health Service, although that is being torn apart by the current far-right crazy regime we're living under. I like the fact that we've got a certain degree of a welfare state, even though that is being eroded. But, you know, I like my friends, I like my family, I like British comedy. But I mean, you know, probably if I was, say, like, I don't know, German, I probably like things about being German, you know? I might like the way that German trains are pretty awesome, or probably like German comedy. I don't know if they have any of that. So it's just basically it doesn't mean anything. It's just meaningless posturing. It's like just saying you're proud of being British, or that you know, saying that you're patriotic wherever you're from. If you're American, saying you love your country. Like, what does it mean? Because what does the country mean to you? It's kind of relatively meaningless. There is no inherent meaning to America. There is no inherent meaning to England or Britain or any country's name. You know, we're all just like human beings going on with our lives in lots of different ways and making different choices. I mean, I just think, especially with the kind of mass communication of the internet, a sort of national identity is kind of really an old-fashioned and weird idea. Something weird to be sort of proud of. It's very strange to me. I mean, if you get it, maybe you could like explain it to me in the comments. Oh, look at me, I'm doing a sort of YouTuber-y like thing. Like and subscribe, and, you know, why not share on social media?
And I also love the fact, in equal measures, that I am British, and I also love the fact that I can be in 4 different countries in our great union and still feel at home, feel welcome and feel safe.
Well, considering that you're a Conservative politician, you're probably not welcome in Scotland and Wales, or London, or sort of most of the north of England, probably some of Ireland as well. Pretty much the only place you'll probably be actually welcome is sort of like these sort of scrubby little Tory towns just slightly to the north of London, but still in the south. This sort of band of slavering boobs who really wreck our country at every goddamn election, who are basically every bad stereotype you can imagine of British people sort of brought to life and living in this kind of weird fox hunting meets chav wasteland. But I'm sure some of them are very fine people.
And I also am extremely proud of our fantastic armed forces, our police force.
It's always the same with these people, isn't it? The world over. They're just falling over themselves to talk about how much they love the armed forces and how much they love the police. You know, any sort of uniformed authority figure they can bootlick, or at least pretend to bootlick, because the ironic thing is that the Tories have cut police funding, like, massively. And as a kind of lefty who is generally on the other side of the fence when it comes to police, if you see what I mean, usually my main interactions with the police tend to be kind of hostile, let's put it that way. I don't have that much of a problem with it, you know, defund the police and all that, but like there is a purpose to the police beyond just like hurting people and locking up innocent left-wingers, black people and hippies. Like, what if there's a murder or something? I mean, without any funding to do anything, they won't, you know, do anything. So really, it just goes to show that this kind of patriotism, if you want to call it that, is just pandering to who he perceives to be his idiot voter base. It's kind of super disrespectful and kind of patronising to the people who he thinks would deign to vote for him, you know.
Our judiciary, our Queen, our sports, and our union flag.
You'll notice he gives absolutely no reason why he's proud of any of these things. Because there is no reason, because he isn't. Because no sane person is. He's just literally listing things that he thinks, well, that he hopes the people he wants to vote for him next election like. He has no understanding really of why they may or may not like those things. He just thinks they probably do. Maybe a PR person or like a marketing person told him that they do. It's just total nonsense.
Extremely proud, but sometimes I get the feeling that some of us, and we've all been guilty of this, feel a little bit embarrassed about our past and our culture and our heritage.
Well, there are some things in our past, our history and our heritage that we probably should be a bit embarrassed about, or maybe even ashamed of. You know, I mean, Britain was an empire at some point and sort of suppressed and oppressed, using military might several cultures which didn't deserve it, didn't want it. Were also instrumental in the slave trade. You know, it was the British who invented concentration camps to put Boers in South Africa. There's all kinds of horrible stuff in our history. There's probably some good things as well, you know, but there are some things it's probably a good idea to be at least a little bit sheepish about.
So I want to see our union flag on all public buildings, on our schools, on our hospitals, and wherever we can get one.
Why? What, like a totally pointless waste of time and effort and money? Like, really, you know, we've got record levels of child poverty. We've got thousands of people dying of COVID because this government totally f***ed up the response. Like most right-wing countries, like all right-wing countries, really. One of the highest death counts in the world. And yet what this numbnuts is worried about, this absolute... is concerned with is he wants to get bits of cloth up on buildings that serve no real purpose whatsoever. What an absolute gibbering...
Because there's one thing the union flag says to me, or two things it says to me when I see it flying high, and that's Great Britain.
Well, that's sort of literally its meaning, isn't it? So it doesn't mean anything. It's just like a literal logo for identifying a country that has no real meaning to it whatsoever. It's just a location and a system of governance, or, you know, the people who live under that. I mean, it's just totally meaningless. That's very funny. So I was hoping he was going to come up with something better than just Great Britain. Excuse me. So what can we learn from all this? Well, we can learn that largely these right-wing nuts are kind of pretty much similar across the whole of the world. Although the British ones are sort of maybe less theatrical, maybe a bit more kind of, I hesitate to say down to earth because their ideas are batshit insane, but that's their sort of presentation. At least that's what it seems to me as a British person. They're less sort of showbiz and flashy suits and more sort of trying to pretend to be a more sort of average type person. And we can also see that, you know, the stupid and hollow and totally meaningless pandering to the history of a country and its sort of symbolic institutions without actually addressing any material practicalities is something that's sort of super common across both sides of the pond and probably elsewhere. But also that there is, you know, this is supposed to be a sort of turning point, I suppose, as a sort of news-ish sort of channel. It's certainly a media channel. But the UK one seems to go on about history all the time, about history this and history that. It's very strange. It's like they're trying to sort of artificially generate a sort of sense of national identity that basically doesn't exist in the UK. You know, in America, I think people have this idea. They talk about like the American dream, the American something, an all-American man, America's sweetheart, America's ass, or ass, as you guys would say. But that's just something that's kind of not really present in British culture. We don't really talk about Britain unless we're sort of taking the piss a bit. And I think that's something that the British right kind of laments a bit. I think they wish we did that a bit more because that's one of the main sort of points of leverage, isn't it, in general? I mean, it's much easier to sort of take money out of poor kids' mouths when you're doing it draped in the flag and pretending that it's patriotic. Anyway, I hope you guys are doing well and are relatively COVID-free, and the vaccines are coming out soon, so hopefully this will all be over by next Christmas. Or maybe Christmas 2025, 2030. I'll still be wishing the same thing, but hopefully not. Mwah.